I'm going to talk about symmetry initially, and then the disruption of symmetry, and then into intervention, which is principally what I do. I'm a sculptor, have training as a visual artist initially, and then went back and studied architecture. Okay, so now this concept of group theory. So if we understand the square and we think about the rotation of a square, so we've got a square that can rotate 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 270 degrees, but it keeps its same state. There is 8 permutations or 8 different structures of the square, but it still retains the same state. And this is a core concept to this idea around group theory. A dodecahedron has a similar idea, but that has 60 rotations. This is called E8. And this is a cousin of what the scientists called in the 80s when they discovered it, the monster. Most amount of symmetry is that there are atoms on the sun. Symmetry in music, and particularly Bach's Goldberg variations, which he uses reflections, is in one key, and then it's reversed in a mirror on the other side. Then he goes through to these other sets of variations where essentially if you mapped it visually, the variations over the 29, there's 30 in total, the 29 spiral out like an eternal vortex. It's crackers. You can see here that the symmetry on these pieces are vast. But the interesting point to bring up with Bach is that although he's got this ultimate symmetry through the whole 29 variations, that you would seem like at the end he would take you back to the beginning point as though there's this sort of ultimate reflectivity. He then just drops the whole project, and then on the 30th variation he introduces a folk tune. I think it shows that there's these points of control and there's this potential for rupture. So as I said, I trained as an architect and an artist, and now my practice is really combining the both. But this project is specifically drawing, and it sort of talks about this testing of control and this idea of the symmetry and then the rupture or the break. This project looks at my movement as I sort of twist around. I do a series of drawings which map that. And this became, just like we talked about with symmetry, a set of rules or a set of structures. And that does form a basis of the work I make. I generally set up these structures or rules or systems and then try and break them or try and rupture them or pivot off them. It was then about going back and taking that same object and then augmenting it again and then making it into a larger appendage, this thing that is sort of flaccid. It becomes this sort of physical struggle, and for me was a really lovely way of opening up this conversation between the two parts of me, this idea of ultimate control and the architectural mind, and this sort of more abandoned free-form experimentation and exploration in art practice. And then we get another iteration here where I'm then hanging the failing of it is the part that's probably the most interesting, and the missing of the wall, the object left, and this sort of tracing of that mark. As part of my job at Sydney Uni, where I teach the first year architecture students, this was an exhibition that tracked 100 years of the architecture faculty at Sydney Uni. So I collaborated with Yakov Paradis. The main idea was to try and understand the content of this 100 years, which is a pretty vast thing to take on. We simply mapped all of the different dates and how many items that we had that related to those dates. And then we started to deploy that across the space. So we used a Hilbert curve, plotting each of the dates in relation to a moment in space, but also a moment in time. So we developed through that in a really sort of systematic way, areas of the 70s, earlier on into the 30s and 40s, and then back around into current day. And each of these points are plotted in space in relation to the date, and then the aluminium then moves between it. So the project is in Wynyard Station. It looks at reusing the timber escalators and reinserting them, this idea of connecting past and future journeys. 85 years they were in service. in Bradfield's design, who you would know from the bridge, he also designed this underground, and he brought the concept of the escalators to Sydney as this notion of how can we move the large volumes of people up to the surface. One of the art consultants who I know, Harry Partridge, called me up. I said, "Oh, Chris, I just wanted to call. How you going? What are you up to? You know, I've got a great project. Would you be interested?" "Oh, look, Harry, terrible time. Haven't slept. End of the year. It's Christmas Eve, and you know, Lewis has just been born, and there's no way I can take on anything." "Oh, cool. But I'll just tell you about it. It's this big public commission at Wynyard Station where you can use all the escalators of the old Wynyard timber escalator." I'm like, "Oh, I'm totally available. That's fine. I can take it." "No, that's fine. I sleep, whatever." And from there, strangely enough, from that first call, I actually had some sort of vision of the work. Maybe it was the sleep depth. This is what we came up with. We came up with this central spine, a tube that was connected between these different points of the building. That seemed pretty straightforward. It would be the main structural load for the cantilever between the different points. And then we would attach the treads to that central pipe. That all seemed pretty straightforward and awesome. And then Transport came back and said, "No, you've only got 48 hours to install it." And so from 2.5 weeks, which was in the contract, they said, "No, you've only got 48 hours to build this." So we had to completely change the design. There's no way this project would have been able to be installed in that sort of rapid time. So we had to rethink how we were designing it really from the ground up. So we looked at another structure, which was essentially an aluminium box section that the treads would then get attached to it. So this structure then became the basis of how we were going to build it. That essentially no longer was there a central pipe. We looked at this an accordion aluminium structure that was prefabricated into these separate elements. And then that would all get bolted together on site. And in fabrication terms, doubly curved surfaces are pretty complicated and expensive if you're trying to do it out of sheet material. And we spent so long trying to work it out. Like, there's no way we're going to have to facet it, or we could radius it off. Maybe we could 3D print it. Maybe we could get a 6-axis robot. And the fabricator's like, no, you just push it. And so they just pushed it. And what was good was that they just pushed all the metal into those positions. These are all perfectly radius, but the outer skin, they just basically work at like a light gauge timber sheet. Sort of material memory in those treads that people have an incredible affinity with. So to be able to work with that was so potent. And I think there's that really incredible connection that people have about something that's very familiar that they have a connection with, but something's being shifted or distorted.